When Thomas, a humble car mechanic and supporter of family values, accidentally discovers the betrayal of his wife Anna, his world collapses. But instead of breaking down, he turns pain into a weapon. His cold-blooded revenge plan destroys the lives of traitors, giving him a chance to start over with a clean slate.
Thomas wiped the grease from his hands with a rag, leaning back against the workbench in his garage. The radio played softly in the background, a familiar tune blending with the hum of tools and the faint smell of motor oil. It had been another long day, but Thomas didn't mind. He loved his work, and he was good at it. Customers trusted him, not just for his skill, but for his honesty, a rarity in his line of work. As he locked up the garage for the night, he felt a flicker of pride. The business wasn't flashy, but it paid the bills and kept him busy. More importantly, it allowed him to give Anna the life she deserved, their cozy house on the edge of town, regular vacations, and little luxuries like the garden she loved tending. When Thomas stepped through the front door, the smell of freshly baked bread greeted him. Anna was in the kitchen, her blonde hair tied back in a loose bun, a soft smile on her face as she glanced up. "You're home later than usual," she said, her voice warm. "Had a last-minute customer," Thomas replied, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "How was your day?" Anna shrugged lightly, her eyes drifting back to the dough she was kneading. The usual. The store was busy, but nothing exciting. Anna had always been the kind of woman who drew attention effortlessly. At the grocery store, at the gym, or even just walking down the street, people couldn't help but notice her. She had a natural grace, the kind that made even mundane tasks seem elegant. Her charm extended beyond her looks. She had a warm, inviting demeanor that put people at ease. But lately, Thomas had sensed a change. During dinner, as he talked about the new tools he was considering for the shop, Anna seemed distracted. She nodded in the right places, but didn't offer much more than a few polite comments. "Everything okay?" Thomas asked, spearing a piece of roasted chicken with his fork. Anna hesitated, then gave him a small smile. "Of course. Just tired, I guess. Work's been a bit dull lately." "Dull?" Thomas frowned. "I thought you liked the store." She shrugged again, picking at her salad. "It's fine. I don't know. I guess I just miss a little excitement." Thomas chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. "Excitement? You want me to start coming home with wild stories about engine explosions?" Anna laughed softly but didn't respond, her smile fading as she stared at her plate. To anyone on the outside, Thomas and Anna's life seemed perfect. Their house was always tidy, their dinners shared at the table, and their weekends often spent together, whether working on home projects or hosting small get-togethers with friends. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. Anna's restlessness was subtle but growing, and Thomas, ever focused on providing and maintaining stability, had yet to notice just how deep her dissatisfaction ran. Thomas sat on the edge of his bed, tying his work boots, when he noticed something out of the ordinary. Anna's phone, which used to sit charging on the nightstand overnight, was now nowhere to be seen. He glanced around the room and spotted it on her vanity, the screen face down. It wasn't the first time lately that she'd kept it close, almost guarded. Downstairs, Anna bustled about the kitchen, packing her lunch for work. Her laughter at something on her phone drifted to him, but when Thomas appeared in the doorway, her laughter abruptly stopped. "What's so funny?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh, nothing," she said quickly, slipping the phone into her pocket. "Just a silly video from a coworker." Thomas raised an eyebrow. Anna rarely cared about social media or funny videos, but before he could press further, she planted a quick kiss on his cheek and grabbed her purse. "Don't forget dinner with my parents this weekend," she said, her voice bright as she headed for the door. "I'll be home late tonight. Inventory at the store." "Again?" Thomas asked, his tone laced with mild surprise. Yeah, it's the end of the quarter, she said over her shoulder before disappearing out the door. Thomas stood there for a moment, her sudden distance gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. Later that day, during a break at the shop, Thomas sat with his longtime friend and co-worker, Mike. The two shared a worn picnic table behind the garage, their lunches spread out between them. Anna's been acting different lately, Thomas said, breaking the silence as he unwrapped his sandwich. Mike raised an eyebrow, chewing thoughtfully before responding. Different how? Thomas shrugged. I don't know. She's been keeping her phone with her all the time, and she's been working late a lot. She's also, I don't know, quieter. Mike smirked. Maybe she's just tired of hearing about carburetors. Thomas chuckled, though the unease lingered. Maybe. She says she's just stressed from work. Mike gave him a knowing look. Women have a way of keeping things bottled up until they explode. Might be worth sitting her down and talking it out. Thomas nodded but didn't respond. That evening, after closing the shop, Thomas stopped by the grocery store to pick up a few things for dinner. As he entered, he immediately spotted Anna near the register. She wasn't alone. Jack, their neighbor, stood across from her, leaning casually on the counter. Thomas paused, his hand tightening around the shopping basket as he watched the interaction. Jack said something, and Anna's face lit up with a smile that lingered a second too long. She laughed softly, her body angled slightly toward him in a way that felt almost intimate. When she caught sight of Thomas, her smile faltered, and she straightened. Tom, hey, what are you doing here? She called out, her voice a touch too bright. Thomas approached, his eyes briefly flicking to Jack, who gave him a friendly nod. Just grabbing some things for dinner, he said, his tone neutral. Hey, Jack. Evening, Tom. Jack replied, his easy grin in place. You've got a good one here. Anna's been a lifesaver with helping me figure out my garden lately. Thomas forced a smile. She's full of surprises, he said, his eyes locking with Anna's for a fleeting second. As Jack turned to leave, Thomas noted the subtle tension in Anna's posture, the way her hand brushed her hair nervously. Walking back to his truck, Thomas replayed the scene in his mind. Jack's casual demeanor, Anna's overly bright tone, the way she'd laughed at his joke, it all felt off. For the first time, the thought crossed his mind. Was there something more going on? He shook his head, dismissing it as paranoia, but the seed of doubt had been planted. It was a brisk Saturday morning, and Thomas was tidying up the hallway closet, where coats and shoes were often tossed in a rush. The faint smell of Anna's perfume lingered on her jacket, which hung neatly among his work coats. As he shifted her coat to make room, something fell from the pocket, a neatly folded handkerchief. Thomas bent down and picked it up, immediately noticing the embroidered initials in one corner. Frowning, he turned it over in his hands. The material was fine, far too fancy for anything Thomas would use, and certainly not something Anna had ever mentioned owning. He placed it on the small table by the door, deciding to ask her about it. Later, as Anna returned from running errands, Thomas met her in the kitchen, where she was unpacking groceries. Hey, I found something in your jacket pocket earlier, he said, holding up the handkerchief. This isn't mine. Do you know whose it is? Anna glanced at it, her expression faltering for a split second, before she forced a laugh. Oh, that's from a co-worker at the store. It's a gag gift. We've been exchanging silly little things like that lately. Thomas raised an eyebrow. A gag gift? With monogrammed initials? Anna's smile tightened as she shrugged. Yeah, it's a joke. You know, like one of those Secret Santa games we used to do at the holidays. It doesn't mean anything. Something about her tone didn't sit right with Thomas, but he didn't push further. Instead, he nodded and handed it back. All right. Just seemed a little odd, that's all. You're overthinking it, babe, Anna said lightly, turning back to the groceries. Now, can you help me with these? Though Thomas let the matter drop, the interaction stayed with him throughout the day. Anna's explanation had been quick, too quick, and her reaction didn't feel like the casual dismissal of someone with nothing to hide. As he worked in the garage that afternoon, his mind wandered back to recent events. Anna's late nights, her distant behavior, and now the handkerchief. It wasn't much, but it added to the growing sense that something was wrong. The next day, the feeling intensified when Thomas saw Jack yet again. He was walking his dog past their house, pausing briefly near their garden. Anna, who had been watering plants, glanced at him, then quickly looked away, pretending not to notice him at all. It struck Thomas as strange. Normally, Anna would at least wave or say hello, but her deliberate avoidance only deepened his suspicions. As Jack continued on his way, Thomas stepped outside. "Hey, Jack!" he called. Jack turned, his easy grin in place. "Morning, Tom. How's it going?" "Not bad," Thomas replied, watching him carefully. "Busy week?" Jack shrugged. "About the same as always. You know how it is." Thomas nodded, his face neutral, but his mind was racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Jack's frequent appearances near their house than mere coincidence. Over the next few days, Thomas began to pay closer attention. He noticed small things, how Jack always seemed to find a reason to linger nearby, how Anna would glance out the window when she thought Thomas wasn't looking. It was subtle, but it was enough to keep the knot of unease in his chest tightening. The handkerchief, the late nights, the stolen glances, it all began to paint a picture Thomas didn't want to see. For now, he pushed the thoughts to the back of his mind, unwilling to confront what they might mean. But deep down, he knew the harmony of their life together was beginning to crack. The hum of the truck's engine filled the still night air as Thomas pulled onto his quiet street. The clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m., hours earlier than he was supposed to be home. A power outage at the shop had cut his shift short, and the idea of surprising Anna with his early return gave him a small sense of excitement. But as he approached the driveway, his excitement waned. The house wasn't dark as he had expected. The warm glow of lights spilled from the living room windows, cutting through the cool darkness outside. Thomas frowned. Anna had mentioned she'd be in bed early after a long day at work. He turned off the truck's engine and stepped out, letting the silence envelop him. Something felt off. Walking toward the house, he instinctively kept his steps quiet. He reached the corner of the living room window and paused. From his vantage point, he could see through the partially open curtains into the well-lit room. Anna was there, sitting on the couch, but she wasn't alone. Jack was with her, leaning slightly toward her, their heads close together. Thomas felt his stomach twist. Jack's hand rested on the back of the couch, dangerously near Anna's shoulder. They were talking, but Thomas couldn't hear the words. The way Anna laughed softly at something Jack said felt too intimate, too familiar. She shifted slightly, her knees turning toward him, and Jack mirrored her movement. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. His mind raced with questions, each one darker than the last. What the hell is he doing here at this hour? He thought, his fists clenching at his sides. But instead of barging in, he stayed frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. Confronting them now might lead to more lies or denials. He needed to be sure. He needed proof. Thomas stepped back from the window, careful not to make a sound. He turned and walked quickly toward his truck, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. The glow of the house faded behind him, but the image of Anna and Jack, sitting too close on the couch, was seared into his mind. Once inside the truck, Thomas gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. His breath came in shallow bursts as anger and confusion swirled within him. Why is she doing this? Is it what it looks like? He muttered under his breath, his voice cracking with frustration. He sat there for several minutes, staring blankly at the dashboard. The warmth of the earlier evening was gone, replaced by a cold, sinking certainty. Something wasn't right, and it wasn't going to fix itself. Thomas drove away from the house, his mind racing. Barging in would give them an excuse to deny everything, but if he was going to confront Anna, he needed undeniable proof. As he pulled into an empty parking lot a few blocks away, he made a mental list. Cameras, logs, phone records. Whatever it took, he would get to the bottom of this. The doubt that had been gnawing at him for weeks had grown into something much larger, much darker. This wasn't paranoia anymore. It was real. And for the first time, Thomas accepted that his suspicions weren't just whispers in his mind. They were a warning he couldn't ignore. Thomas sat in the darkened garage, the glow of his laptop illuminating his face. The events of the previous night replayed in his mind on an endless loop. Anna's soft laugh, Jack's too familiar posture, the way she seemed completely at ease in his company. There was no more room for doubt. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. His hands worked methodically as he unpacked a small box of surveillance cameras he had ordered months ago for added security around the shop, but never used. Now, they would serve a different purpose. The next morning, Thomas waited until Anna left for work before moving through the house with purpose. He carefully positioned the cameras in key locations: the living room, the hallway, the kitchen, and their bedroom. Each device was small and unobtrusive, blending seamlessly with the decor. When he finished, he double-checked the feeds on his laptop. The cameras captured clear, crisp video and sound, their angles perfect for monitoring activity throughout the house. As he tested the setup, he muttered to himself, "No more guesswork. I'll see the truth with my own eyes." Thomas didn't stop at the cameras. That afternoon, he installed a discreet GPS tracker on Anna's car, hidden beneath the rear bumper. Using an app on his phone, he could now see every location she visited. He sat in the truck, staring at the blinking dot on the map that represented Anna's car. It was parked at the store, as expected, but the sense of control over the situation gave him a small measure of relief. If she's lying about where she's going, I'll know, he thought grimly. Over the next few days, Thomas carefully monitored the feeds and tracker, searching for any sign of unusual activity. For the most part, Anna's routine seemed normal. Work, errands, the occasional visit to a friend's house. But something about her demeanor on the cameras felt off. She seemed restless, pacing the living room with her phone in hand, or staring at her reflection in the hallway mirror longer than usual. One evening, as Thomas reviewed the day's footage, he noticed a moment that made his pulse quicken. Around 3 p.m., Jack's truck pulled into the driveway. Thomas leaned forward, his eyes glued to the screen as Jack casually walked up to the front door. Anna answered almost immediately, her expression nervous as she glanced over her shoulder before letting him in. Thomas's jaw tightened as he watched the interaction unfold. Anna and Jack sat on the couch, their voices too low for the microphone to pick up. At one point, Jack leaned in, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She didn't pull away. Thomas hit pause, his hand shaking slightly. He closed his eyes, willing himself to stay calm. "This is it," he whispered. "This is the proof I needed." But the anger simmering beneath the surface refused to stay contained. He hit play again, forcing himself to watch as Jack reached for Anna's hand. The two sat in silence for several minutes before Jack stood and walked to the kitchen. Anna followed, and the camera in the hallway captured them disappearing into the next room. Thomas didn't need to see the rest to know what was happening. Later that night, Thomas sat alone in his truck, staring at the GPS tracker app. Anna's car was at home, parked where it always was, but the knowledge of what had happened earlier in the day burned in his chest. He pulled out a notebook and began writing. Each step of his plan took shape on the page, his pen moving with cold precision. Cameras, GPS, recordings, conversations. He would gather every piece of evidence he needed to confront Anna and Jack with undeniable proof. But this wasn't just about confronting them. No, Thomas had something much bigger in mind. As he closed the notebook, his eyes hardened with resolve. "You wanted excitement, Anna?" he muttered under his breath. "You're about to get more than you bargained for." The next day, Thomas reviewed more footage. The pattern was becoming clear. Jack visited whenever Thomas wasn't home, staying just long enough for a conversation that always seemed too close, too intimate. One particular recording made his stomach churn. Anna stood at the kitchen counter, nervously adjusting her hair while Jack leaned against the wall, smirking. "You're sure he doesn't suspect anything?" Jack asked, his voice picked up clearly this time. Anna hesitated before replying. "He's busy with work. He doesn't have time to notice." The words felt like a knife twisting in Thomas's gut. He hit pause, his fingers gripping the edge of the desk so tightly that his knuckles turned white. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was the cold, undeniable truth. Anna was lying to him, and Jack was part of it. And now, Thomas knew exactly what he needed to do. Thomas sat in his dimly lit garage, his laptop open on the workbench. The glow of the screen illuminated his face, highlighting the stony expression that had settled there. His headphones crackled softly with the sound of Anna's voice, recorded just hours earlier. "He doesn't even notice half the time," Anna had said, her tone dismissive. "He's always busy tinkering in the garage or talking about car parts. Sometimes I wonder if he even remembers I exist." Jack's low chuckle followed. "You deserve better than that, Anna. Someone who actually sees you, you know? He's too busy fixing engines to fix his marriage." Thomas paused the recording, his jaw tightening. The words stung, but they also fueled the cold determination building inside him. If they thought he was blind to their betrayal, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. Over the next several days, Thomas meticulously recorded every interaction between Anna and Jack. He adjusted the cameras for better angles, ensuring he captured not just their words, but the subtle gestures, the touches, the looks, the shared smiles. One afternoon, as he reviewed the footage, he caught a particularly damning conversation in the living room. "When are you going to tell him?" Jack asked, leaning back on the couch, his arm casually draped over the backrest. Anna hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her blouse. "I don't know. It's not that simple, Jack. I can't just walk away." Jack smirked. "Why not? What's he going to do, cry about it? He doesn't strike me as the emotional type." Anna laughed nervously. "He'd probably just fix the sink or something to distract himself." The callousness of their words hit Thomas like a blow to the chest, but instead of letting the anger consume him, he leaned back in his chair, his mind already working. Thomas grabbed a notebook from the desk drawer and flipped it open. He drew a line down the center of the page, labeling one column, Anna, and the other, Jack. Under each name, he began listing their vulnerabilities. For Anna, social connections. Her parents adored Thomas and valued their marriage. Finances. She depended on Thomas for financial stability. Reputation. Her charm was her currency in their small town, and any stain on her character would spread quickly. For Jack, his business. The landscaping company he ran relied heavily on local goodwill. Relationships. Jack was single, but his clients and neighbors respected him, until they wouldn't. Legal exposure. If Thomas could connect the affair to professional misconduct, it could ruin him. Thomas stared at the list, his mind racing. "Take away what they value most," he muttered under his breath. "That's how you make them pay." The first step was to tighten the noose around Jack. Thomas began drafting an anonymous letter to the local homeowners association, detailing concerns about Jack's professionalism and trustworthiness. He included vague accusations about improper behavior, ensuring the letter was just inflammatory enough to spark gossip. Next, Thomas reached out to a friend who worked in the local police department. Over a casual beer, he planted a seed of suspicion about Jack's business practices, hinting that the landscaper might not be entirely above board. "I'm not saying anything specific," Thomas said, feigning reluctance. "But I've heard some things. Could be worth looking into." The officer nodded, intrigued. "We'll keep an eye on him." With Anna, Thomas took a more personal approach. He began subtly altering their routine, creating an undercurrent of tension she couldn't ignore. He forgot to transfer money into their shared account, forcing her to use her own savings for groceries. When she asked about it, he shrugged. "Tight month at the shop," he said simply. He also stopped engaging in their usual small talk. When Anna made an effort to chat during dinner, he responded with curt, distracted answers, letting her feel the growing distance. One evening, as she stood in the kitchen scrolling through her phone, Thomas deliberately walked behind her and glanced at the screen. "Who's that?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Anna flinched, locking the phone and shoving it into her pocket. "Just a friend from work," she said quickly. Thomas nodded, a ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. He didn't need to press. He already had what he needed. By the end of the week, Thomas had compiled a trove of evidence: recordings, messages, financial records, and even footage of Jack sneaking into the house while Thomas was at work. Sitting in his garage late one night, he organized the files into folders on his laptop, labeling them with cold precision. Anna, affair, Jack, visits, recorded conversations. As he stared at the screen, a sense of calm washed over him. This wasn't about losing his temper or making rash decisions. It was about taking control. "They think they've gotten away with this," he murmured to himself. "But they're about to find out what happens when you cross me." The first phase of his plan was complete. Now, it was time to move to the next stage. Thomas leaned back in his chair, the dim glow of his laptop lighting up his determined expression. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he composed an anonymous email to the local authorities. The subject line read, "Concerns about Jack Turner's landscaping business." The body of the email was vague but incriminating enough to catch attention. "I believe Mr. Jack Turner is conducting his business without proper permits and possibly engaging in fraudulent practices. It's worth investigating his financial records and client dealings. Several neighbors have expressed concerns about his ethics." Thomas hit send and watched as the email disappeared into cyberspace. It was the first domino in what he intended to be a carefully orchestrated collapse of Jack's life. 2 days later, Jack was in the middle of mowing a client's lawn when a city inspector pulled up to the curb in a marked vehicle. "Mr. Turner?" The inspector called out, stepping out with a clipboard in hand. Jack shut off the mower and wiped the sweat from his brow, his easy smile faltering slightly. "That's me. What's going on?" "We've received some reports about potential zoning violations and permit issues regarding your business operations," the inspector said, flipping through his paperwork. "I'm going to need to see your permits and tax documentation." Jack's stomach dropped. He had all the necessary paperwork, mostly, but some of his smaller jobs had been done off the books to save time and money, and he wasn't sure how much the inspector would dig into his records. Sure," Jack said, trying to sound confident. "I'll need to get that from my office. Can I send it to you later today?" The inspector nodded, but handed him a notice of inspection. "We'll be in touch. Make sure you have everything ready within 48 hours. As the inspector drove away, Jack clenched his fists, a cold sweat breaking out across his back. This was more than just a minor inconvenience. It could spiral into something much worse. Over the next week, Jack's problems multiplied. It started with a phone call from a longtime client. "Jack, I don't know what's going on, but I can't keep using your services," the client said, her voice hesitant. "There are some rumors going around about your business, and I can't afford to be associated with anything questionable." Jack tried to argue. "Rumors? What rumors? My work has always been solid. You know that." "I know, but perception matters," she said apologetically. "I'm sorry, Jack." The call ended, leaving Jack staring at his phone in disbelief. By the end of the week, 3 more clients had canceled their contracts. Some cited financial reasons, while others hinted at concerns about his reputation. His once busy schedule began to empty out, and the silence of his phone became deafening. At a local cafe, Jack approached a colleague he often collaborated with on larger projects. "Hey, Paul," Jack said, forcing a grin as he slid into the seat across from him. "Got a big yard job coming up. You interested in teaming up again?" Paul shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Jack's gaze. "I don't think so, Jack. Heard some things lately. It's just not a good time." Jack leaned forward, his tone sharp. "What things? Come on, Paul, you know me. I run an honest business." Paul hesitated before finally meeting his eyes. "People are saying you cut corners, maybe even pocket cash without reporting it. I don't know if it's true, but I can't risk my own reputation right now." Jack slammed his fist on the table, drawing stares from nearby patrons. "This is bullshit. Someone's spreading lies and you're just eating it up." Paul raised his hands defensively. "I'm sorry, Jack. I really am, but I can't get involved." As Paul left, Jack sat there, seething. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't random. Someone was targeting him. Back in his garage, Thomas watched the fallout unfold. Through carefully timed phone calls, emails, and anonymous tips, he had sown just enough doubt about Jack's character to make the rumors stick. He took no pleasure in the destruction, at least that's what he told himself. But as he reviewed the latest messages from his informants, confirming Jack's plummeting business prospects, he felt a grim satisfaction. "You wanted to play games, Jack," Thomas muttered under his breath. "Well, now the game's mine." This was only the beginning. Jack's livelihood was crumbling, but Thomas wasn't done yet. There was still more damage to be done. Thomas stood in the kitchen one morning, sipping his coffee as he watched Anna rush to gather her things for work. She seemed distracted, her usual cheer replaced with a subtle tension that hadn't been there before. "Have you seen my wallet?" she asked, rifling through her purse with a frustrated huff. Thomas didn't look up from his cup. "Check the counter. You left it there last night." Anna grabbed it and flipped it open, only to freeze. "Why is my credit card declined?" she asked, her voice sharp with confusion. Thomas shrugged. "I had to freeze it temporarily. There was some suspicious activity on the account. Should be fine in a day or two." Anna frowned, her frustration bubbling over. "You could have told me. I needed that for groceries." He raised an eyebrow, feigning nonchalance. "Didn't think it was a big deal. You have cash, don't you?" She stared at him for a moment, her irritation plain, but she didn't press further. Grabbing her keys, she muttered something under her breath and left the house. As the door closed, Thomas allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The cracks were starting to show. Over the next week, Thomas began implementing small but deliberate changes in their routine. He stopped asking about her day and gave curt responses when she tried to initiate conversations. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Anna brought up plans for their anniversary dinner. "I was thinking we could go to that new Italian place downtown," she said, her tone light. Thomas barely looked up from his phone. "Sure, whatever you want." The lack of enthusiasm threw her. Normally, he would engage, ask questions, maybe even suggest something himself. But now he seemed distant, almost disinterested. Anna shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Is everything okay? You've been quiet lately. Thomas glanced at her, his face unreadable. Work's been busy. Don't worry about it. The dismissal stung, but Anna nodded, forcing a smile. Okay, just checking. The tipping point came on Anna's birthday. She had spent the entire day at work, fielding calls and texts from friends and family wishing her well. But from Thomas, nothing. No call, no text, no sign that he even remembered. When she got home, the house was quiet. There was no cake, no balloons, none of the little touches Thomas usually prepared to make her feel special. Instead, she found him in the garage, tinkering with the engine of a car. Hey, she said, leaning against the doorway. Do you know what day it is? Thomas didn't look up. Thursday? Her stomach dropped. It's my birthday, Tom. He froze for a moment, then straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. Oh, right. Happy birthday, Anna. The casualness of his tone made her chest tighten. That's it? She asked, her voice breaking slightly. You didn't plan anything? He shrugged. I've been swamped. Figured we'd do something this weekend. Anna stared at him, tears pricking her eyes. You always remember my birthday. Always. Thomas sighed, setting down the rag. I'm sorry, Anna. I'll make it up to you, all right? But his apology felt hollow, and Anna couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. Over the following days, Anna began to feel the weight of the changes in their relationship. Thomas wasn't overtly hostile. He still did the dishes after dinner, still kissed her on the cheek before bed, but the warmth was gone. She found herself second-guessing everything, the tone of his voice, the way he avoided eye contact, the lack of affection. One evening, as they sat in silence during dinner, Anna finally spoke up. Tom, are you mad at me? He looked at her, his expression neutral. Why would I be mad? I don't know. You've just been different lately. Distant. Thomas shrugged. I've been busy, that's all. You're imagining things. But Anna wasn't convinced. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew with every passing day. From the outside, Thomas's actions seemed small, forgotten gestures, missed conversations, brief moments of indifference. But they were calculated, designed to chip away at Anna's sense of stability. She started checking her phone more often, wondering if she had done something wrong. She spent longer in front of the mirror, second-guessing her appearance. And when she caught herself glancing at Jack's number in her contacts, she felt a pang of guilt she couldn't explain. Thomas watched it all unfold with a quiet sense of satisfaction. He wasn't just punishing Anna for her betrayal. He was making her question everything, just as she had made him question his own reality. The stage was set, and the tension between them crackled like a live wire. Now, all that was left was to tighten the noose. The tension in the house was palpable as Thomas waited for Anna to return home. The evidence he had painstakingly gathered, videos, messages, receipts, sat neatly organized in a folder on the kitchen table. His heart pounded, not with fear or sadness, but with the icy resolve that had carried him this far. Tonight, there would be no more lies. The sound of Anna's keys in the lock broke the silence. She stepped inside, her usual greeting dying on her lips as she saw Thomas sitting at the table, his hands clasped in front of him. Tom? What's going on? She asked, setting her purse on the counter. Sit down, he said evenly, his voice devoid of emotion. Anna hesitated, her eyes flicking to the folder in front of him. A flicker of unease crossed her face, but she complied, pulling out a chair across from him. Thomas pushed the folder toward her without a word. Anna stared at it, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened it. The first image was a still from one of the hidden camera recordings, Jack entering their home while Thomas was at work. Her breath hitched. She flipped to the next page, a screenshot of her text conversation with Jack. "He doesn't suspect a thing. Can't wait to see you tonight." "Where did you get this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Thomas leaned back in his chair, his gaze cold and unwavering. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that I know. About all of it." Anna's hands shook as she closed the folder. "Tom, I can explain." "Explain?" Thomas cut her off, his tone sharp. "Explain how you've been sneaking around with Jack behind my back? How you've lied to my face every day for weeks? Please, Anna, I'd love to hear your explanation." Tears welled up in Anna's eyes as she reached across the table. "Tom, it was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Thomas pulled his hands away, his jaw tightening. "A mistake?" he repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "Mistakes are forgetting to pay a bill or losing your keys. You don't accidentally cheat on your husband." Anna's voice cracked as she tried again. "I've just been feeling so lonely. You're always working, always busy with the shop. Jack made me feel—" "Don't," Thomas interrupted, his eyes narrowing. "Don't you dare blame me for this. If you were unhappy, you could have talked to me. Instead, you decided to destroy everything we've built together." The room fell silent except for Anna's muffled sobs. Thomas leaned forward, his voice steady but cold. "You have two choices," he said. "We can end this peacefully. You agree to a divorce, no fights, no drama, or—" He gestured toward the folder. "I make sure everyone knows exactly what you've done. Your parents, your friends, this whole town. Even Jack won't be able to look you in the eye." Anna's head snapped up, her face pale. "You wouldn't." Thomas's expression didn't waver. "Try me." For the first time, Anna seemed to grasp the depth of the situation. She wiped at her tears, her voice trembling as she asked, "What do you want me to do?" Thomas stood, towering over her as he picked up the folder. "You're going to think long and hard about what you've done, and when you're ready, we'll finalize the paperwork." He left the room without another word, leaving Anna alone at the table, the weight of her actions pressing down on her like a physical force. For the first time, she truly understood what her betrayal had cost her, and how much more she stood to lose. The dining room was alive with chatter and the clinking of glasses. Anna's parents, Margaret and Harold, sat at one end of the table, engaged in lively conversation with their longtime friends, the Petersons. The table was adorned with candles and a spread of dishes that Thomas had carefully prepared. Anna sat next to Thomas, her smile tight but present. She'd been trying to rebuild the facade of normalcy ever since their confrontation, but Thomas had remained distant. Now, with her parents and their friends present, she hoped this dinner might mark a turning point. Thomas raised his glass, a subtle signal that quieted the room. "I just want to say, thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his tone warm. "Family means everything to me, and I'm grateful to have all of you here." There was a murmur of agreement, glasses raised in a toast. Thomas stood, holding his glass in one hand, while gesturing to a small laptop sitting on the sideboard. "Before we dig into dessert, I wanted to share something." Anna frowned, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "Tom, what are you—" He held up a hand, cutting her off. "Please, Anna, let me finish. It's important." He walked over to the laptop, clicking a few keys. The television on the wall came to life, displaying a frozen image of Jack entering their home. The room fell silent, the jovial atmosphere evaporating in an instant. Thomas pressed play. The first video showed Jack walking into the house, greeted by Anna. The footage cut to them sitting on the couch, their body language unmistakably intimate. A collective gasp echoed through the room as the screen transitioned to a series of text messages. Anna, can't wait to see you tonight. Tom won't be home until late. Jack, I'll bring the wine. You bring that dress I like. Margaret clutched her pearls, her face pale. Harold's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the screen. Anna shot to her feet, her voice shaking. Tom, stop this, please. Thomas turned to her, his expression cold. Why? So you can keep lying? Everyone deserves to know the truth, Anna. As the video continued, showing Jack and Anna in increasingly compromising situations, the room descended into chaos. Anna, how could you? Margaret whispered, tears in her eyes. What were you thinking? This is disgusting, Harold said, his voice low but filled with anger. We raised you better than this. Anna's friends avoided her gaze, murmuring among themselves. The Petersons, who had always admired Anna's charm, looked at her with open disdain. I didn't mean for it to happen. Anna cried, her voice desperate. It was a mistake. Thomas remained silent, letting the weight of the evidence speak for itself. By the time the video ended, Anna was trembling, her face streaked with tears. She turned to her parents, reaching for Margaret's hand. Mom, please, you have to understand. Margaret pulled away, her expression filled with disappointment. I don't know who you are anymore, Anna. Harold stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. We're leaving. Tom, I'm sorry you had to go through this. As the guests filed out, offering curt goodbyes to Thomas and ignoring Anna entirely, she sank into her chair, her world crumbling around her. Thomas stood at the head of the table, watching Anna with an impassive gaze. You wanted to keep this quiet, he said, his voice calm but cutting. But lies like yours don't deserve silence. Anna looked up at him, her face a mixture of rage and despair. You've ruined me, she whispered. Thomas leaned in, his voice low. No, Anna, you ruined yourself. Thomas sat in his garage, the faint smell of motor oil and steel surrounding him as he reviewed the documents on his laptop. On the screen was a carefully constructed dossier filled with details that painted Jack as a criminal mastermind of financial fraud. Most of it was true. Jack's shady practices had already left a trail, but Thomas had taken it further, embellishing the evidence with fabricated invoices, altered bank statements, and anonymous testimonies that made Jack's operation look like a ticking time bomb. He hit send, and the file disappeared into the inbox of a trusted contact in law enforcement. This should be enough, Thomas muttered to himself, leaning back in his chair. Let's see how well Jack handles the consequences of his actions. A week later, Jack was in the middle of trimming a client's hedge when two unmarked police cars pulled up to the curb. The officers stepped out, their expressions grim as they approached Jack with purpose. Mr. Turner? One of them asked, holding up a badge. Jack straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. Yeah? What's this about? We have a warrant to search your business premises, the officer replied. You're under investigation for financial fraud and operating without proper permits. Jack's face paled as his mind raced. There's been some kind of mistake, he stammered. I run an honest business. The officer's gaze didn't waver. Then you shouldn't have anything to hide. As they escorted him to his office, neighbors gathered on the sidewalks, whispering and pointing. Jack's stomach churned at the sight of familiar faces watching him like he was a criminal. Over the following days, Jack's life spiraled out of control. The police uncovered inconsistencies in his tax filings and incomplete documentation for several jobs. Thomas's fabricated evidence added fuel to the fire, making it impossible for Jack to defend himself. Clients began canceling contracts, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. One longtime client called Jack directly. "Jack, I don't know what's going on, but I can't have your name tied to my property anymore. My reputation's on the line." "You know me," Jack pleaded. "You've seen my work. This is all some kind of setup." But the client remained unmoved. "I'm sorry, Jack, it's out of my hands." Jack's business account was frozen during the investigation, leaving him unable to pay his employees or cover his own bills. Within weeks, his equipment was repossessed, and his office space was shuttered. The "for lease" sign in the window felt like a nail in the coffin. The final blow came when his landlord delivered an eviction notice for his home. Jack stood in his empty office, staring at the few personal items he'd salvaged: a coffee mug, a stack of business cards, and a framed photo of his late father, who had always believed in him. His hands trembled as he picked up the frame. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he whispered to himself, the weight of his decisions crashing down on him. The town turned on Jack with ruthless efficiency. Former friends avoided his calls, and his name became synonymous with scandal. At the local diner, whispers followed him wherever he went. "That's Jack Turner," someone muttered. "He's the one who got caught stealing from his own clients. Can you believe it? I heard he's bankrupt now." Another voice added. Jack's once confident stride was replaced with hunched shoulders and hurried steps. He barely left his small, temporary room in a rundown motel, each day a grim reminder of how far he had fallen. From the comfort of his garage, Thomas kept tabs on the fallout. The local news covered the collapse of Jack's business, reporting on the financial improprieties and the criminal investigation. Thomas leaned back in his chair, a cold smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You wanted to take what wasn't yours, Jack," he said quietly, staring at the screen. "Now you've got nothing left." For Thomas, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice, delivered on his terms. Jack's empire had crumbled, and there was no escape from the ruins. Thomas stood in the living room, arms crossed as he watched Anna pace nervously. Her face was pale, her once confident demeanor replaced with desperation. Suitcases sat by the front door, their presence a heavy reminder of the irreversible shift in their lives. "Tom, please," Anna began, her voice trembling. "We can fix this. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But we've been through so much together. Doesn't that count for something?" Thomas's gaze was cold and unyielding. It did, but not anymore. Anna stopped pacing, turning to face him fully. "You don't have to do this. I'll do anything. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. Just don't throw everything away." Thomas shook his head, his tone calm but firm. "I didn't throw anything away, Anna. You did. The moment you decided to betray me, you ended this marriage. The suitcases are packed. Your parents are expecting you." Anna's eyes widened in horror. "You told them?" "They deserved to know the truth," Thomas replied, unflinching. "You've lied to everyone around you for months. The least you can do now is face the consequences." Anna stepped closer, reaching out to touch his arm, but Thomas pulled away, his movements deliberate. "Don't do this, Tom," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You've always been my rock. I don't know how to live without you." Thomas let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "You should have thought of that before inviting Jack into my house, into my bed. Did you even think about me, Anna? About what this would do to us?" "I was stupid," she cried, her voice breaking. "I wasn't thinking, Exactly." Thomas cut her off, his voice rising for the first time. "You weren't thinking about anyone but yourself, and now You get to live with that. Anna sank into the nearest chair, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. Thomas watched her for a moment, his expression softening slightly before he forced himself to look away. You need to go, he said quietly, but firmly. The movers will be here in an hour to take your things to your parents' house. Anna stood slowly, her legs trembling beneath her. She picked up her purse and walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. Turning back to Thomas, she made one last attempt. Tom, please, don't let this be the end. Thomas met her gaze, his eyes steady and resolute. It's already over, Anna. Goodbye. As the door shut behind her, the house fell into a heavy silence. Thomas stood motionless for a moment, his chest rising and falling as he took a deep breath. He walked to the window, watching as Anna loaded her suitcases into the waiting taxi. Her shoulders were slumped, her movements slow and defeated. When the taxi pulled away, Thomas turned from the window and surveyed the empty living room. It looked the same as it always had, but it felt lighter, freer, as if a weight had been lifted from the walls themselves. Thomas moved to the fireplace, picking up a photograph of him and Anna from happier times. He stared at it for a long moment before placing it face down on the mantel. That's done, he murmured to himself, his voice steady. He didn't feel triumphant. There was no joy in what had transpired, but there was peace. Thomas knew that by forcing Anna out, he had reclaimed control of his life, and he wouldn't let her shadow linger any longer. For the first time in months, Thomas allowed himself a small, genuine smile. The door to his past was firmly shut, and the future was his to shape. Anna's life unraveled quickly after Thomas sent her away. Word of her affair with Jack spread like wildfire through their small town. Gossip at the grocery store, whispers at the cafe, and even her once loyal friends turned their backs on her. Walking into the local market, Anna felt the stares and heard the murmurs. That's her, someone whispered, barely masking their disdain. Can you believe she threw everything away for that landscaper? The humiliation was unbearable. Her parents were cold and distant, their disappointment palpable. At family dinners, the silence was suffocating. Meanwhile, Jack fared no better. With his business destroyed and his reputation in tatters, he packed up and left town. A for sale sign stood in front of his once thriving office, and his phone stopped ringing entirely. As he loaded his belongings into a beat-up truck, Jack stared at the empty streets he used to know so well. I'll rebuild, he muttered to himself, but the hollow confidence in his voice betrayed his doubt. The two of them, who had once seen their affair as a spark of excitement, were now trapped in the wreckage of their own making, isolated and defeated. For Thomas, life slowly began to take on new colors. The house, once a battleground for betrayal, became a project of renewal. He repainted the walls, replaced the furniture, and even built a small garden in the backyard. One evening, as he sat on his new patio with a glass of whiskey in hand, the soft glow of string lights illuminating the space, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. His friend and co-worker Mike stopped by, bringing a six-pack and some encouragement. The place looks great, Tom, Mike said, settling into a chair beside him. I gotta say, you're handling this better than most guys would. Thomas chuckled, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I didn't have much of a choice. It was either wallow or move on. Well, you made the right call. Here's to moving on, Mike said, raising his beer. Thomas clinked his glass against the bottle, a small smile playing on his lips. The nights grew quieter, but they no longer felt lonely. Thomas began reaching out to old friends he hadn't spoken to in years, reconnecting with parts of himself that had been lost in the chaos of his marriage. He found joy in the little things, the sound of rain on the roof, the smell of freshly cut grass, the simplicity of a good book. A few months later, Thomas attended a community charity event at Mike's insistence. The room buzzed with energy as neighbors mingled, bidding on auction items and enjoying live music. It was there that he met Claire. She wasn't flashy or overly forward. Her warmth was understated but magnetic. She worked for a local nonprofit, her passion for helping others evident in the way she spoke about her work. They started talking over coffee and found themselves lost in conversation for hours. Claire's sincerity and gentle humor were a refreshing contrast to the guardedness Thomas had grown accustomed to. As they walked to the parking lot at the end of the evening, Claire turned to him with a smile. "It's been a while since I've met someone who actually listens," she said. Thomas shrugged, his own smile growing. "It's been a while since I've had a reason to." From that night, their connection grew naturally, built on trust and mutual respect. Thomas didn't feel the need to rush or impress. For the first time in years, he felt comfortable just being himself. One evening, as Thomas sat with Claire on the same patio where he'd once reflected on his past, he looked up at the stars and realized just how far he'd come. The pain of betrayal had been a crucible, reshaping him into someone stronger, more self-assured. Claire nudged him gently. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas turned to her, his expression calm but full of meaning. "How sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself again." Claire smiled, resting her hand on his. Together, they watched the stars, the promise of a new life shining brightly ahead.